Why won't you convert like everyone else? This is what critics say about descendants of slaves identifying as Israelites. Some scholars suggest that Black Judaism stems not from traditional roots, but is a reaction to slavery and segregation. It's time to expose the truth. Negroes are being accused of identity theft. Did you know that? Many feel that Hebrew Israelism is an appropriation or theft of Jewish history and identity by people who would be accepted if they would only convert like everyone else. As discussed in the last session, the religion that began in Babylon was given a new name. Many are misled, believing it represents the beliefs of ancient Israelites. So we're going to spend some time talking about this so that you can see how shrewd Esau has been and how he cannot be excluded from end times prophecies. Esau is the end of the world. So we need to be able to identify his influence. By the time we're done, you should be able to see how the pieces of the puzzle fit together. We have a case of identity theft going on, and it's time to expose the lies. Let's read some excerpts from this article entitled, "Black People Are Actually Jews? The Historical Origins of Kanye West's Inflammatory Comments." Now, why do they say his comments were inflammatory? It's because he said that the 12 lost tribes of Judah are the people known as the black race. So the author is asking, where did this claim come from, and is it anti-Semitic? He says, as someone who has reported extensively on the African Hebrew Israelite community in Israel and the context from which it developed, he can offer some essential background. He says in the late 19th century, two former slaves turned preachers, Bishop William Crowdy and Bishop William Christian, received the same message from God, that the biblical Israelites were black and that African Americans are the true children of Israel. So the author is saying that the message was revolutionary as it subverted earlier theories about the fate of the lost tribes of Israel. So basically, ignore what the two slaves had to say because it undermined the accepted narrative. But did they discount how Muhammad and Joseph Smith received their messages? It goes on to say that there is debate about whether it is anti-Semitic simply to posit or say that African Americans represent the true children of Israel, implying, as it does, that non-black Jews are lying or unaware of their real identity and history. Members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints believe they, too, come from Israelite tribes, but they do not regularly face accusations of cultural or historical appropriation or anti-Semitism. So why is that? They can say it, but we can't. So Bruce Haynes, author of Soul of Judaism, Jews of African Descent in America, said he wouldn't call it anti-Semitism. He sees it as ahistorical. He says it's not a good reading of history. He also added that some of the groups that call Jews impostors are certainly crossing the line. Now, the author of the article says, thus, an idea introduced in the late 19th century by preachers seeking to promote African American uplift and racial justice became, over time, a rhetorical weapon used against Jews by Black people who are distrustful of them. He says, whether one finds the idea hateful or silly, it certainly rubs many Jews the wrong way. Why is it rubbing them the wrong way? Colorism. The narrative they want everyone to accept is that the original people were white, and they take issue with those who say otherwise. They actually came up with a name for it, you all. It's called Black Judaism. According to the book written by James Landing, Black Judaism is a form of institutionalized religious expression that Black people use to identify themselves as Jews, Israelites, or Hebrews in a manner that seems unacceptable to the whites of the world's Jewish community, primarily because Jews take issue with the various justifications set forth by Black Jews in establishing this identity. But they didn't have a problem with the Church of Latter-day Saints saying it, did they? Let's go on. It says, Black Judaism, as defined here, stands distinctly apart from the Judaic expression found among Black persons that would be acceptable to the world's Jewish community, such as conversion or birth to a recognized Jewish mother. So in order for them to accept you, you have to convert to Judaism or prove that your mother, not father, is Jewish. The conclusion is that Black Judaism is, in fact, not descended from Judaism, but it is rather specifically an African American response to slavery and segregation. Why not just come out and say you all are only saying this to make yourselves seem important or that you matter? So this guy, Shay Rashan, also known by the pen name Manish Tana, is an African American Orthodox rabbi and writer. He says there has to be a distinction between Hebrew Israelites and Black Jews. I absolutely agree. He says it's because no sect of it has ever been started by anyone actually Jewish and does not require or attempt conversion to Judaism. He says Hebrew Israelism is the Jewish equivalent of the Nation of Islam, and it's gaining attention while there is a long, authentic Black Judaism that is woefully underrepresented, and listen to this, underrespected by normative white Judaism. You all, that is one crazy counter argument. He converted to become one of them, and they don't respect him. Tell us again why we should convert? Let's look at this article from Jewish Journal entitled, Who Counts as a Jew of Color, and Does It Even Matter? Now it says, because of unrest across the United States, rising from anti-Semitism and social media posts about white privilege, it has forced many Jewish people worldwide to reflect on their varying experiences of privilege. It says, this has caused a rift between Jews in the diaspora able to pass as white and those less able to assimilate into whiteness. Can we just pause right there? So who are these Jews passing for white? It says, amidst this internet drama, a sort of victimhood pyramid has emerged within the Jewish community itself, one which unfortunately conforms to the same colorist framework we should strive to avoid as a Jewish nation united against anti-Semitism and white supremacy. Parallel to the struggle for Black rights in America, a narrative has formed among various Jewish diaspora groups that pits white Jews against Jews of color. So the author is asking this question: who qualifies as a Jew of color? It says colorism, or the judgment of a people based on their skin tone, emerged across the world due to Western European colonialism. As a result, many have come to associate Ashkenazim with whiteness, despite their Middle Eastern origins. But isn't that what you see when you look at the guy on the right? The article goes on to talk about how they are being accused of lording over society, but you should instead look at the things they suffered because of the Nazis and Muslims who saw them as inferiors. They want you to see them as victims of a stereotype that accuses them of holding excessive power. Now listen carefully for the deception. It says the term of color stems from colored, the derogatory term placed upon Black Americans during the segregation era, and thus frames a person's ethnic background as identifiable by their phenotype. Thus, while the term Jews of color understandably classifies Jews unable to function as white based on appearance, white Jews frequently winds up as the default for Jews associated with Europe and the West, specifically Ashkenazim. It goes on to say that equating white passing Ashkenazim as simply the white Jews not only portrays them as indistinguishable from their former European oppressors, but also excludes all of the Mizrahi and Sephardi Jews passing as white in the West. So we're just supposed to pretend that many of them were not plantation owners and owners of the slave ships, right? They want folks to stop categorizing Jews as of color because they say it serves as a point of erasure. Do you see what's happening here? It's okay for them to be classified as white for the privileges, but don't equate them with white when it comes to the brutality of colonization and slavery. Now let's break this down so that we know who these people are who are seen as Jews of color, because it's not this guy on the right. It says, therefore, depicting all Jews of recent MENA descent alongside non-white passing Jews as the lump sum of those who are not white Ashkenazi Jews, fallaciously conflates phenotype with assumed marginalization based upon geographic heritage. After all, although Sephardim and Mizrahim may not feel wholly represented by mainstream American Jewish culture, white passing MENA Jews do not experience the often daily fear of being offed or erased, unarmed by police, or being followed around a store under suspicion of shoplifting, a reality faced by many Black Jews in the United States. Did you catch that? Jews who can't pass as white are experiencing the daily fear of being taken out when they're unarmed. They're being followed around a store under suspicion of shoplifting. They basically tied this into our lived experiences while excluding us. If this was really happening, they should also be included in the strange fruit hanging from trees, don't you think? The article goes on to say that we don't need the frame of Jews of color or white Jews to acknowledge the lived realities of all Jews, including the atrocities suffered by some of our community members in the past and present. In fact, highlighting Ashkenazim as the Jews that have allegedly transformed into white people presents a dangerous binary that targets Jews with recent residence in Europe as the scapegoat diaspora community from whom other Jews should dissociate in order to appease intersectionality. We need to pause right there. Highlighting Ashkenazim as the Jews that have allegedly transformed into white people, isn't that an admission that the original people were not white? Do you see how they play in our faces? So who are the culture vultures here? It goes on to say white passing Jews have a duty to ensure inclusion in our social and religious circles. And when discussing anti-Semitism, white passing Jews should clarify that we aim not to claim the same level of oppression as other minorities, but instead to highlight the hypocrisy that we are singled out as white and non-Jewish MENA groups that pass as white are not. Now let's take a look at the MENA groups they're talking about. This comes from the United States Census Bureau. It says the Census Bureau's classification for the MENA population is geographically based and includes Arab-speaking groups such as Egyptian and Jordanian and non-Arabic speaking groups such as Iranian and Israeli. It also includes ethnic and transnational groups from the region, such as Assyrian and Kurdish. Again, this is why we have to make a distinction. Let's look at this from ancient origins. Where are Ashkenazi Jews from? Their origins may surprise you. Now, this is going to reference a study by co-author Martin Richards, an archaeogeneticist at the University of Huddersfield in England. He said, while Ashkenazi Jews have lived in Europe for many centuries, the results of the study using DNA samples show that most European Jews descend from local people who converted to Judaism, not individuals who left Israel and the Middle East around 2,000 years ago. Now let's dig a little deeper to see what the DNA says. This information comes from academia.edu. It's entitled The Proto-Semitic Origin of E1B1B1, the Afro-Asiatic Founding Father of Semitic Identity and Beyond. It says this study critically evaluates two competing hypotheses. The Levantine presumption, which posits Y haplogroup J1P58 as the indigenous Semitic marker, and the autochthonous continuity model, which identifies E1B1B1 as the true Proto-Semitic lineage. It says this paper argues that E1B1B1 is the superior candidate for the original patrilineal Semitic and Israelite lineage. Let's make sure we understand this. The Ish folks claim that their DNA is the true Proto-Semitic lineage, J1 P58. It is a major Y chromosome haplogroup, but it originated in the Caucasus Mountains, not the Levant. So how can it be the original marker for the Israelites? Now, what's happening here is that they are now acknowledging that the E1B1B DNA that many associate with Esau is much older than the J haplogroup. Esau's DNA would be the Proto-Semitic origin, and it's proof that those folks lied about the DNA of the priestly class. We'll look at that shortly. So even though they intermingled, we know that the Y DNA is not going to change. It serves as an identifier, as a marker. So this says, while the haplogroup J1P58 is frequently conflated with Semitic identity in modern discourse due to its high frequency among contemporary Arab and Jewish populations, a rigorous archaeogenetic analysis suggests this association is largely a result of later demographic shifts rather than deep ancestral roots. This paper posits that haplogroup E1B1B, E1B1B, specifically subclades EM215 and EV68, represents the truly autochthonous patrilineage of the region, deeply rooted in the Natufian and pre-Neolithic populations of the Levant and North Africa. Let's just pause and think on that. So it's telling us that this study demonstrates a continuous presence of E1B1B that predates the Bronze Age influxes of Caucasus and steppe-derived J1A, R1A, and R1B. Now let's look at the Cohen model haplotype, and this is key, you all, because according to Jewish tradition, the Kohanim class or priestly class is defined by patrilineal descent from Aaron, and this lineage is a core part of Jewish identity and priestly roles. It's based on J1 or J2. But the evidence is showing that this is incorrect. It says the identification of a specific Y chromosomal lineage often among Jewish priestly Kohen lineages has been used to argue for a common Israelite paternal ancestor. However, the existence of multiple divergent haplogroups among self-identified Kohens, including R1A, R1B, and E1B1B, suggests that the priestly class was not monolithic in its genetic origins. Furthermore, the Samaritan Kohanim, who represent the most conservative and endogamous group, carry E1B1B1, which aligns with the indigenous Levantine substrate. This suggests that E1B1B1 is the more likely candidate for the original Israelite patrilineage, while J1P58 may represent a later introduction or a specific sublineage that gained prominence through historical circumstances rather than deep ancestral continuity. Now, this part is extremely important because they're going to talk about the Y DNA. They rarely want to acknowledge E1B1A, but the truth is coming forth. They did a comparative study and they found that haplogroups E1B1B and E1B1A are two major Y chromosome lineages found in Egypt representing distinct waves of human migration in history. E1b1b was the most common paternal haplogroup across Egypt and North Africa. It originated in East Africa and migrated northward along the Nile River. It's highly prevalent in modern Egyptians. Let's remember that they categorize the Egyptians in the MENA populations. But pay attention when it says modern. That's an indication that they're talking about the folks who are there now, not necessarily the ancients. So it's found in modern Egyptians, the Horn of Africa, and the Middle East. Let's also remember that there was no Middle East back then. Now, this is key. The results show that E1b1a is a brother lineage that split from the same ancient root. What are we looking at here? E1b1b and E1b1a represent two brothers that split from the same root. You all understand the implications associated with this type of information and why they try to hide it, right? And that's why I count on you to help me share it, because they don't want this out there. It goes on to say that while E1b1b moved primarily north, E1b1a migrated south and west. It is extremely common in West and Central Africa today, but has also been detected in the royal lineages of ancient Egypt, such as Pharaoh Ramses III. Now, this is going to tell us that E1b1b has an Afro-Asiatic origin from which Semitic languages diverged. So how can we be anti-Semitic? It's gaslighting. It says Semitic languages originated in Northeast Africa, specifically the Horn of Africa, with subsequent expansion into the Levant. Haplogroup E1b1b, particularly subclades EM215 and EV68, shows a distribution pattern consistent with the expansion exhibiting high frequencies in populations speaking Cushitic, Cadic, and Amadic languages, as well as the Levant. Now look at what it says. The Indo-European Association was an intrusion. They are the Yamnaya people, the Indo-Aryans. This says the evidence indicates that Semitic languages were already established in the Levant by the time J1P58 arrived. So this is the region they're referring to as the Horn of Africa. It's made up of Djibouti, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia. Additionally, parts of Kenya and the Sudan are sometimes included in discussions about this region. So why does E1b1b have an overlap with haplogroup J? This is exposing Esau. He can no longer hide himself. This says in modern Middle Eastern and Semitic populations, E1b1b lineages coexist directly alongside haplogroup J, specifically J1 and J2, while haplogroup J is often considered the major dominant paternal marker in the Middle East today. E1b1b represents the older foundational Afro-Asiatic substrate that merged with these populations during the dawn of agriculture and early linguistic expansions. This says by the 8th century, the words Jew and merchant were practically synonymous. And it was around this time that Ashkenazic Jews began relocating from ancient Ashkenaz to the Khazar Empire to expand their mercantile operations. This Jewish migration led to some of the Turkic Khazar rulers and numerous Eastern Slavs living within the Khazar Empire to convert to Judaism, so they didn't miss out on the lucrative Silk Road trade between Germany and China. But the demise of Khazaria due to continued invasions and finally the Black Death devastated this last Jewish empire of Khazaria. This led to the Ashkenazic Jews splitting into two groups, some remaining in the Caucasus and others migrating into Eastern Europe and Germany. The two groups still call themselves Ashkenazic Jews. However, the name Ashkenaz became more strongly associated with Germany and the European group for whom Yiddish became their primary language. Now let's go back to what Ogilvy wrote in the 1600s. He said, the people came from Judea. This is telling us that the West Coast was not their original homeland. They descended from Abraham. They were numerous. They lived near the Niger River and they came from many countries. Now, in order for them to blend in with the people who were already there, it would mean that they were dark-skinned. They looked like the other Africans in appearance, and they were already present before the Europeans arrived. So when we consider who was living in West Africa and the migratory patterns, the dominant DNA would not have been those associated with Europeans. European phenotype would have been inconsistent with the climate in that area. Also, when our people fled into West Africa, they remained Israelites. The location changed, not the DNA. They had dark, melanated skin and woolly hair. So how do you explain the discrepancies? So the standard explanation for all of this is that those Jews, or Yehudim, on the west coast of Africa were converts. Historians say they became Jews when Portuguese men married African women, creating Afro-Jewish communities. And this is a ridiculous argument. If Portuguese men were marrying African women, the DNA of their offspring would be R, L, G, or J. The dominant DNA in that region was E1B1A. The dominant Y DNA haplogroup among the Portuguese is R1b, which is a common haplogroup in Western Europe. Do you see how insane this argument is? Not only that, there is documented evidence that Israelite customs were already present in some West African tribes before the Portuguese got there. So these conclusions are part of an effort to dismiss the evidence. They're trying to make a square peg fit into a round hole. So why won't we convert like everyone else? It's because we don't have to. We are the original. We're going to end it there and continue next time. If this message has been a blessing to you, remember to like, hype, and share. You're also welcome to subscribe if you have not already done so. We normally upload messages on Sunday mornings at 8:30 a.m. Yah willing. Join me next time.